And go ahead with this. Although the governor has the votes to override it, no, she doesn't, does she?
She can veto it.
She can veto it. All right, it would seem that it would be in your interest and that of your constituents for you to work with the Republicans to come up with a compromise plan, especially one that takes into account the fact that many individuals, including some seniors who can afford to pay some Arizona state income tax, don't pay any.
Well, let me address the issue of working with the majority party. Did I say a joke? You know, I try, honest. But who has the most impact, particularly on this bill, were the realtors and the military. And I think I mentioned that. I can't remember if I mentioned it in my radio interview or whatever, but today, or if I told you. It was the realtors, the Arizona Association of Realtors, a very powerful lobbying group at the Capitol, that had the major objection to the loss of the mortgage interest deduction. This has been around. I don't even know how long the mortgage interest deduction has been around, but America placed a value on citizens owning homes. You know, you have the white picket fence and owning your own home, and it's how we've been raised. So this mortgage interest deduction incentivizes individuals to purchase homes. It stimulates the building of homes by our home builders, and it stimulates the realtors so that they have a job to sell homes. So the realtors, Arizona realtors, were vehemently opposed to the flat tax and the exemption being eliminated for the mortgage interest. Their lobby was so strong, and then the military lobby became stronger, not the military brass, but the commanders and some of the individuals that are retired, the veterans that have retired here. They would lose their $2,500 exemption on their pensions. So those two groups created the most pressure on the sponsor, and that was why he held the bill. Honest, as passionate as I could possibly have been, I was in committee. As friendly as I was with the sponsor, I was. I could have stood on my head, I could have bent my knee down. I could not have changed this bill, and that is the fact of how the legislature is. So those powerful lobbying groups have more clout and more say than I do. But who has more clout and say than those special interests? Are the public, are the citizens. You have a voice, and your legislators will listen to you, I believe. And if they don't, you have the ability to help them listen a little better every 2 years. So my appeal is to you. I mean, I fully recognize that the sponsor will make a deal with the realtors so that he can get their support for this bill. I fully expect that he'll make a deal with the military just to get his bill passed. But as I said before, you and I will still pay 8 or even maybe 9.5 out of 10, you know, because you have to readjust the formula. If you leave the mortgage interest deduction in, if you leave the military pay in, you've got to readjust your formula. So maybe 9.5 people out of 10 will now have their taxes increased to create this flat tax. So, you know, this is a powerful moment for us here where we have this great opportunity. You have this wonderful opportunity to speak to people that have your well-being at hand and to educate yourself. I mean, you know what? I wanted to say this. I wanted to say that you all in this room now know more about the flat tax than almost every person that voted yes on this bill at the legislature. Very few people fully understand the impact of this bill, and you now do. You have literature in front of you. You've heard more informed speakers than have been heard up there. You know, there was a Republican legislator. He's retired, Jeff Hill. He's a senator, actually, from Phoenix. and he's a CPA now. And he came and he testified. And fortunately, he testified because the sponsor started listening, and Jeff Hill said, you're now going to tax the military. They don't have any taxation. You're now going to tax the first $2,500 of pensions. Those are exempt. And he went on and on and on, and he educated the sponsor because the sponsor didn't know of those issues. So it gave him pause. But I really think the power is in your hands. And I really appreciate you coming out on a night like this and taking time to hear the impact. And of course it's going to impact churches. Of course seniors and disabled communities are no longer going to be able to deduct their expenses, and they'll have to start paying taxes as a result. And of course the nonprofits are going to be impacted, because if we lose the ability to deduct our charitable donations, people aren't going to make as many donations. It's just a simple fact. And it was the legislature. It was, as you said, Jim, it was the president, and it was many individuals of the majority party that said, let your churches and your nonprofits take care of you. We've got to cut these social safety nets. And now the flat tax is going to, guess what? It's going to cut the churches and the nonprofits. And then where are our people? And what will Arizona be? It frightens me. It truly frightens me. And I think you're here today because you're frightened at some level of what this means and what this means about our government and how little we care about people. This isn't about political gain or anything. This is about your pocketbook, and this is about caring for people, primarily. So thank you for caring so much.
But maybe go ahead. Just one comment to follow, Senator.
Yeah.
I think we should encourage also to contact the governor, not just the legislators, because the governor has stepped out on many issues where, at least I personally didn't think she would. And I think in many cases she has been a centrist that helped bring some things together. So I would not discount, and I would say, as well as your legislators, let the governor know exactly how you feel about it on this issue or any other issue.
This neon yellow sheet, it has the governor's contact information at the top. It has Representative Steve Port, who's the sponsor. And it has all the legislators and then how they voted. So I hope you'll reference that. Thanks, Jim.
How many of you out there like me that I vote in every election? I mean, school board elections, bond elections, every election. How many of you vote? All right, so we really have, you folks have a really loud voice for these folks in this issue. And that's really important. I just love to vote, and I'll vote on anything. Yeah, I think I have some of the questions. Do I have your question? Oh, you want to? Yes, you certainly can. Stand up so we can throw things at you. No, I'm serious. Go right ahead.
This one's, I mean, I want to do election supports this. There are 16 states with a flat tax.
He said there are 16 states. There are actually 7 states that have flat tax.
Okay, so you're right. There are 7 states that have an individual income flat tax. But there are 8 states that have a zero income tax, which is essentially a flat tax. And there are 2 states that tax only interest and dividends at the same flat tax rate. So you've got 16 states that have essentially a flat tax. Am I lying?
Okay. How about let's rather than having it amongst the audience.
Okay. Well, the semantics I understand what you're saying, but it's all taxed at the same rate if it's zero.
Was there a point you wanted to make other than that?
Well, half those states are run by Democrats, and I'm just curious as to why you think that we're going to all slip into poverty under a flat tax.
You know, this is the, and the sponsor knows it, this is the flattest tax in the nation if it passes. Many of those states are taxed at way higher tax rates because they exempted multiple organizations and groups in order to get that tax passed. So This was, as it was proposed, this was a pure flat tax. All exemptions gone and leave the tax credits in place.
I know the one in Utah in particular, it's technically a flat tax, but their exemptions and deductions vary by income. Meaning, you know, they have it adjusted so that it's not flat at the beginning, that it's increasing substantially at the beginning, and then it becomes flat at some point out there. So
it's not like
sometimes
this one.
called a flat tax isn't always a pure flat tax, like this one seems to be.
This is
I
pure.
agree with the
All right,
reduction. That's a problem, but the rate itself is not.
You know, just not on a technical side, but on more of a bottom line side, Arizona does so poorly on so many indicators of well-being right now. You play this game and you pass this, and the net result is that there's a smaller piece of pizza that's going to feed organizations that already have too little of a pizza. So I don't know that you say we slip into poverty as you've framed it or not, but I do know that at the end of the day, there's less amount of money that's available to do what needs to get done than there is today.
But that exists because people are donating their money toward CPAs and lawyers and taxmen and accountants. They can't put it into their bills, so they're giving it to CPAs.
That's a good one. That's a good point. That's a good point. Someone should answer that. Could you repeat it?
And that's why we need charities.
The repeat is
Have
that
jobs.
it'll save a lot of money. You won't have to go to your tax preparers now because the tax will be so simple.
You can exempt
But-
5,000 if you want.
That was my point of my whole, of what I was telling you, was that it's not simple. Figuring out your federal adjusted gross income is, I can tell you as a repairer, the most complicated thing. If you have wages, yeah, it's easy. But a lot of people don't. So figuring out your federal adjusted gross income is very complicated. Computing depreciation is a very complicated computation. And even, I do taxes. This is what I do for a living. You know, I do taxes, and people come into me to what I think is a simple return. It's an easy return. They can go onto the internet and file it, and they still seem to be frustrated and overwhelmed because there's like, you know, all these pages of instructions just to do the most simplest of an easy. Go to irs.gov and look up the 1040 easy instructions and find out how many pages it is. It's not that easy. And that's what it is. People are paying people like me taxes. Now, the elderly sometimes get their taxes done free by these charitable organizations, but when you increase the number of elderly that are going to have to file, now these organizations, these charities aren't going to be able to handle that, and they're going to have to pay somebody to do their tax return.
I'll be here after if anybody wants to come talk.
Flat taxes are often sold under the guise of simplicity, but the reality is, how hard is it, once you get to the bottom line, to go to the table in the booklet and find your income and pick out your tax? All those tax brackets that I mentioned earlier, all those rates, those increasingly progressive rates that I described, are all built into that table. It takes 2 seconds to look up your tax at the bottom of the table. So, the idea that they're reducing all these brackets to one has nothing to do with simplification. Take my word for it. It has nothing to do with simplification. It has to do with tax burden shifting from one group to another. That's what it's about. Make no mistake. They've been doing it for 20 years.
I just want to pose the question, how do we know that? Why do we know that? What is there out there that leads you to believe that that's the
I've
case?
never seen anything different in the past 20 years. Every single tax change that has been made, all the tax cuts to the income tax, every single one of them flattened that tax and shifted the burden from high-income individuals to low- and middle-income families. Every single time, 7 times in a row from 1990 to 2007. Now, I can't believe that they were all that dumb and had no clue that they were shifting burden in addition to cutting the tax. Or that they were reducing the effect of the income tax to the general fund, the portion paid into the general fund, and therefore raising the portion paid by the sales tax, which is a regressive tax.
If I had a television camera in front of you, the question that I would follow up with that is statistics are statistics, and they're correct until they're not. And maybe in the last 20 years or so, it has been the case that all of the tax changes have shifted the burden, but maybe this is the time that it's not. Maybe this is the time that it's real.
How many of you think that this is not about shifting tax burden?
I'll explain it, but if anyone wants to hear it.
Let me just ask, if it is supposed to be revenue neutral, then why is it being done? I mean, that's another
It's not
question.
raising
It will not
taxes.
generate any more
And it's
revenue
not cutting
than it
taxes.
generates now.
That's
There
right.
has to be some shifting or something happening somewhere.
The only thing it does is shift taxes. That's the only thing it does.
Okay, well, that's good, because that's a good 20-second soundbite, and I can use it. All right. Now, I want to bring this point up as well. I thought this was pretty interesting. It says, now, you've talked a lot about low-income people, and all of you talked about low-income people. And the question is what about the middle class? If there's anybody left in the middle class, I'm sure that's the case, but what about the middle class? I mean, and who is the middle class, and what about them? Reverend?
If I might speak to that, the middle class is suffering now. The people that we're seeing are people not necessarily unemployed. There are people who are working every day. These are people that are middle class that are losing their homes and struggling, trying to make ends meet. So I think it's erroneous to think that only poor people are suffering. What we're seeing now is getting worse. The other question I would like to ask, though, is there a plan? If you're going to hurt charities, if you're going to hurt the faith community, the faith communities, is there a plan to pick up where we can no longer support? So what does happen to these people that are having these needs and having these issues? Is there a plan? Is somebody going to say, as they said, now go to your churches and go to your faith community? Well, now that we can no longer do that, now that we're going to be, just trying to do the things that we, to keep our organizations alive, who's going to help these people now? Do we just say, tough luck, sorry, Charlie, and, go to New Mexico? Well, I mean, what do we say? That's one of my questions. When will we as people wake up and realize that if we all share, we can all make it? None of us can make it if we're greedy and we say, I want everything that's mine. I want to help people. I want to see people that are trying succeed. And I think probably one of the things that's hurt us is because we've had so many people who do game the system. We've had people who take advantage of the system. But that's by far not the norm today. We're seeing people who are really struggling, trying to make it. And my biggest opposition to a flat tax is, what are we going to do with those people knocking on doors saying, what do we do now? And they've tried everything they know how to do. There has to be, we are Americans. I mean, that's what makes us a great nation, is that we care about people. And I hope we never get to a place where that doesn't matter anymore.
Dr. Chandler, this would be something I think that you could address too, because you have people coming into your organization with children, you have poor as well as those who are not poor coming in. Has there been any change, any shift in what you've seen as to what might be a middle-class parent over the last few years, as to what is a middle-class parent today and what was one maybe 10 years ago? Have you seen a change?
All that in a 20-second soundbite.
I'll give you longer.
What I think's changed over the last 10 or 15 years is that the resources and supports that used to be out there are no longer as easy to get. So, we've heard the Reverend talk about people going to church to get needs met, and that there's more people and less to provide. We have the same. There used to be, for example, a program funded in Arizona for a family in trouble. And trouble could be broadly defined. One spouse is sent overseas to Iraq, and the mom is having a tough time coping, and the base maybe isn't doing enough. Another family lost their job, and they just need some kind of counseling, or they're taking it out on their kids. So you can think of numerous scenarios that just a small amount of help makes a big difference. Maybe somebody just needs a program to pay their electric bill 1 month to get them through, and they don't want to do a payday loan. We used to have those. Those are gone. And so what's left is for the most needy of the needy. There used to be supports for people with children with developmental disabilities. Now those are taken away, so more people are struggling.
One question, you wanted to say something on that?
Well, I was just saying, I mean, this sheet here shows that it's people up to 100,000 income who are going to get tax increases. The median income in Pima County, I think, is in the 50,000 range for a household. So this is picking up the bulk of individuals in this under 100 who are going to get tax increases. And as she just described before, 8 out of 9, is that what you said? 8 out of 9 are going to be getting a tax increase.
Those of us who are reporters can sometimes be a bit adversarial in our questioning, as all of you who face, Jim Hensel is sitting out here. He's a reporter from Tucson Weekly and Arizona Public Media. He knows that we can sometimes become rather adversarial. But one of the questions that I had before I came here tonight, and I want to ask, is if in fact it is deemed that the flat tax is not really a bad idea, and we're saying here this evening that we do believe it is, but if we do believe that it may not be a bad idea, is there any way to grandfather it in over a period of time, to phase it in over a period of time so that it doesn't hit all of us really abruptly, and it doesn't penalize that 88% of the people in the state of Arizona? Is there some way that we might be able to say, okay, we think this might work, but we need to grandfather it in, and we need to make certain provisions so that people don't get hit really hard, and Dr. Schindler doesn't lose any more money, or Jim Murphy doesn't lose money for the elderly? Is there a way of doing that?
But I would want to ask you a question. Now, why would you want to phase it in? Now, why? Either it is or it isn't. Does it hurt any less if it's phased in over 3 years? That's like putting a frog in a pot of water and then slowly turning up the heat. That's how I see it.
Well, that's a good 20-second soundbite.
And the sponsor was going to phase it in a little bit slowly over 3 years. So,
So that is something that's been broached.
I don't really want the heat turned up myself. If folks are gonna pay more taxes, I want you to have a say in it, and I want you to say, as you did with the Prop 100, where you chose to raise taxes on yourself to pay for education. If you want to raise taxes, I want you to have a say in it, and I want you to have a say in where it goes. That's what I like.
Now, this is a question I do believe that might have been submitted by Representative Eric Cantor of Virginia. It almost sounds that way. If the rich pay less tax, doesn't that mean that they will create more jobs, which could help the rest of us?
If that were the case, corporations would have created so many jobs for so many Americans that we wouldn't be in a recession. If that were true, there is so much wealth out there, but they stuck it in the bank or put it in their investments, or they're hanging on to it. And I know people that are doing that. I'm not saying it as blame, but they're not creating jobs just because they have more money. Doctor, what do you think?
Well, we saw higher tax rates in the Clinton days, and we grew like crazy. The empirical evidence just isn't there. It just doesn't say that's true. And then we had the tax cuts in the Bush era, and it was a sluggish 8 years, frankly. It was not a great time period in growth at all. There's not much empirical evidence to indicate that flattening the tax structure has a positive impact on the economy at all. Haven't seen it.
Well, this is a really important question because I deal with this all the time at the legislature, where I can say this till I'm blue in the face. Does it matter if an economist says it? It doesn't seem to. There really is no proof that we have seen in Arizona. 4, 5, let me see, in 05, 06, and 07, we had a $600 million tax cut, income tax cut. And we had 2 economists come. One that tended to favor more the Republicans, and one that tended to favor, perhaps one could say, the Democrats. And they testified before the House and the Senate. And then afterwards, I went up to them afterwards. And I said, so if we give a tax cut, is there going to be a benefit to Arizonans? Will jobs be created? And the economists that tended to favor the ruling party said yes, and the economists that tended to favor the Democrats said no. But the economists that said yes said, yeah, but it'll take about 4 years for it to take effect. Well, guess what? That would have been in 2010. 4 years would have been up. I have not seen this economy, stimulated by that tax cut. So, yes, we have empirical evidence that it doesn't, and now we have experiential evidence that it does not as well. But we don't have control of this legislature, and so it doesn't matter what we say, and it doesn't matter what the empirical evidence is, unfortunately.
Dr. Charney, I've asked this question before, and I've never gotten a really good answer. And the question is there a study, a series of studies out there that show if companies, corporations, and individuals, especially very wealthy individuals, pay less in taxes, that it will create jobs? My question is there a study out there that shows that to be true? That you know of? I mean, you've been around for a while, and you've done all these studies.
The standard economic answer is that tax cuts can have a stimulative effect. However, not necessarily when they're offset by cuts in government spending. And therein lies the rub. Because if you are going to cut taxes and therefore have to cut government spending, those are such offsetting effects, you start getting into the devil's in the details in terms of, well, what government programs are going to be cut, how much of tax is going to be cut, and so on and so forth. So it's not a clear-cut answer to that question. At some point, we have to get to where we say, we want certain government expenditures, whatever they are. We want certain government services, whatever those are. Now let's figure out a fair and equitable way of paying for them. And whenever you talk about the word fair, you can't just evaluate one tax at a time. You have to look at the whole tax system. And so when you have 56% of the general fund being the sales tax, which is known to be a regressive tax, then might be fair, in fact, it might be fair to have a progressive increasing block rate structure on the income tax, if for no other reason than to offset the regressivity of the sales tax.
Thank you. I came here to learn something tonight, and I did. Jim?
But just a couple comments, and I don't have any studies, but everything we hear, it's not the Raytheons and it's not the B of A's that are laying off 30,000 people now across the world. It's the small business person who really pushes the economy. Listening recently to the new director of the Chamber of Commerce, his membership is mostly small and medium-sized businesses. True, TEP is in there and Raytheon's in there, but the greatest membership are small businesses, and I think he said that's 10 and under employees, and medium it's 50. And that's where a lot of the economic growth is, and those people are hurting, for some of you out in the audience maybe. That's the backbone. Sure, the big companies we think are going to pull us out, but they're the ones that are going under and having more trouble, and it affects every part of the community. So it's just common sense that if the little 10 and 50 employer companies are having trouble across the country, it affects every one of us.
I have another question here, and you may not feel that this is a fair question, and you may not even want to answer it, but I feel the one that's interesting to ask nonetheless. And I'll be interested to see who and how. And it's one of those I wonder questions. And he asks, I wonder if drivers of the flat tax, along with other such proposals, are trying to drive current government services into religious organizations, especially conservative Christian organizations. Isn't there an ideological religious agenda behind this bill and others like it? Oh, we look to the Reverend for help here.
I was going to say, if they're trying to do that, the opposite is true. Instead of driving toward organizations, they're actually taking it away from. If people are giving less to charitable organizations, less to the faith community can only do less. So if they were going to try to drive revenue toward the faith-based community, put a flat tax in, but put some money in there for the faith community. It just seems almost I don't know what the word is, but it's the opposite. It'll have the opposite effect. It'll actually hurt the faith community. Again, two things are going to happen. One, you're going to cut out the charitable contribution, and you're going to increase the tax on the. Most people that particularly go to the church where I pastor, do not make $100,000 a year. In fact, I don't know. We may have, and I don't know how many churches have that kind of a revenue. But if the average income is $50,000 a year and their tax is going to go up, it's actually going to hurt our community. So you're doing two things. You're taking it away from them on both ends, on the revenue end and on the contributing or contributing end. So I think it's going to have the opposite effect. I think it will really not drive to, but drive away from.
Anybody else want to tackle that? No. Dr. Charney, this is probably something that you would be able to answer. Where does the flat tax fit into economic theory, Keynesians or others? Does this fit into economic theory?
I think I studied public finance in the old school. Back when I took public finance as one of my core curriculum, and one of the main criteria of evaluating a tax or evaluating a tax system, one of the important criteria was ability to pay. And that criteria seems to have gone by the wayside. They'll talk about economic efficiency, or they'll talk about X, Y, Z, or W, but ability to pay has disappeared from our vernacular, it seems to me. And this is a pure example of ability to pay being ignored in a tax system change.
All right, we're just about at the end of our time, but Annette, you brought this up, and this is a follow-up question, and I think a very, very good one, and something we haven't touched on all evening at this point. What happens to that lady who has an income of $12,000 a year, who may owe additional taxes at filing, but she has no means to pay it? What happens to that lady?
Well, I mean, they go in and they levy your account. I mean, they will do what they have to do to get the taxes from you. There is no there's no deduction because you can't afford to pay. You have to pay. There's no forgiveness. Yes.
I just agree with you because A, we have a credit now. We have credit. You're paying unlike 2 credits they have for the low income.
I'm sorry. What credit?
The 2 low income credits, the one that gives you $100 automatically when they file it, they have no income.
Oh, you're talking about the $50 excise tax for married people? You're correct. This woman would qualify for the $25 for a single person excise tax. That
credit that eliminates by income, and it's the first $20 is not
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
The credit that goes into 20,000 of income, the 37,000 of income, low income credit.
Yeah, the low-income tax credit, yes, that was the only tax credit that was eliminated. It was eliminated.
Thank you for the question.
Can I just say?
I may have.
Can I say one thing?
No. No, she can't.
No, okay. I've been told you can't, I'm sorry. What about my Social Security? I have my Social Security birthday in a few weeks. What happens to my Social Security? I think you've discussed that, but
Well, the Social Security is a little complicated, and this is where it causes problems with these people, why they have to come to an accountant, unfortunately, because you have to look at your federal and your state law to figure out the taxability of your Social Security. Social Security for a single person, if your non-Social Security income is $25,000 or more, then you have part of your Social Security is taxable. Up to 85% of your Social Security can be taxable, and it gets included into your federal adjusted gross income. This flat tax starts with your federal adjusted gross income, so you have to first research the federal tax law before you can do the Arizona tax law. In the example that I had, the woman's non-Social Security income was only $4,000. So none of that becomes income as part of her adjusted gross income. And so you have to go through this computation to figure it out, how much of your Social Security becomes taxable. And there's this little worksheet that you have to do on the federal side before you can figure out the Arizona stuff.
Well, that brings up another question. What's income? I mean, is there some way that, okay, I have to pay a flat tax on income, but is there something out there that's not income, even though I can put it in my pocket and pay my bills and buy a new car and make my house payment, that's not income and won't be taxed?
Well, yeah, like your child support. If you receive child support, that's not taxable. There's certain interest income that's not taxable. There are certain things, veterans benefits are not taxable. There are certain things in the tax code that are not taxable. Again, those are federal rules, and that flows through to the Arizona.
Will there be any rules in the flat tax here in Arizona that would exempt me?
Yes, so even if your Social Security is taxed on your federal return, because they can tax up to 85% of it, current Arizona law allows you to deduct the taxable portion of your Social Security, and the flat tax continues that. Did that make sense?
Okay, and just one, it is 8 o'clock. Are you ready to go, or can we? You have a question?
I just want to say, as far as income, I'm retired from an airline, and any person that can use some travel benefits, they evaluate what they consider that it's worth. That is considered income, although I cannot put food on the table with it.
So you're going to pay taxes.
And that doesn't change.
Paid as much as $900 additional.
That doesn't change. Those are federal rules, and that does not change.
Before we close, but did you have like a song you were going to sing?
No, I don't. I no singing tonight. You're very fortunate. You're very lucky about that. But I've been told no questions from the floor. But we did allow. I know we did allow a couple. But we did. We reached our 8 o'clock.
So let me say a couple of things, if I could.
I'm sorry about that. But we didn't get to all of the questions. There were many more questions here.
If you put addresses and phone numbers or emails on the back, we'll try to get some answers for you. If you look at the literature, we have our website on there. And what we tried to create on the website, which we just can't do it. Because I know, Annette, I don't know if you're aware of this, but as soon as this forum ends, everybody's going to come to you and ask if they're going to have to pay taxes. So, can we have somebody escort Annette out before we close?
Do you want a final statement from anyone who would like to make a final statement before we get out of here? Thank you very much for your patience, by the way. And I'm very sorry that you couldn't.
All I want to say, we're going, Mr. Grady, I'm Reverend Grady, I'm a Catholic.
Wait, Donna.
No, I can't say this.
Really, Donna.
We're going back to Rome. That's what's going
I
on
know.
here.
I have about 8 of these people that want to know what the heck are we going to do. So we have a speakers bureau. You know, if you want to talk to your church congregation and you want to get a little group together, we'll send a speaker or a neighborhood association. Homeowners associations are going to be greatly impacted. You bring a few people together, we'll come and talk. You say and believe, you have to believe in your own power. You have to believe that your voice matters. If you think your voice doesn't matter, then you wouldn't have come here tonight. You think you matter. Expand your voice, talk to as many people as you can, and let's make a real difference in Arizona. That's what I'm doing. That's what 10 of us are doing, and 10 of us brought 200 of you here, and 200 of you can speak to 4,000. We will have forums in southern Arizona, primarily like this, to educate the public. When the legislature begins in January, we will have pro and con debates with the sponsor and in his district, and we will have it televised so that the public can see both sides of it. But primarily, we didn't do that initially because they've been at the table and they can say whatever they want to the media, and we haven't really had a chance to speak to the public and speak to the media. So forgive me for not making this more balanced this time. But we will get there, and we will be on television, and we will be speaking, and we will have a rally on the day that this bill is, and why we wanted your email. We'll have a rally at the Capitol when this bill is heard, and I hope you'll be there.